Hi guys, I had a 1990 Jetta in not too long ago, 1.8 liter engine. Customer complained about rough running or lack of power, hesitation, smoke out the tailpipe after driving for about 10 minutes. So I took the car for a test drive, and in a case like this, when the car takes some X amount of time to act up, I like to monitor the O2 sensor and the coolant temperature sensor signals. Um, being a Digifont fuel injection system, there are not that many main inputs. There's coolant temperature, O2 sensor, and airflow meter, and obviously intake air temperatures. But that's pretty much it. There is a closed throttle switch and a wide open throttle switch, but they usually don't cause issues aside from idle issues, high idle when at idle, or no full throttle. Um, in terms of no full throttle enrichment. But anyways, I hooked up the lab scope here, my Vantage Pro. The yellow signal is the O2 sensor. The green signal is the coolant temperature signal. With regards to the green signal, it's warm engine. The voltage drop through the thermistor will leave a voltage of have a measurable voltage of close to 200 millivolts. And that signal shouldn't change since the coolant is hot and it should remain hot. There's no need for that signal, or there should be no reason for that signal to change. If it does, then there's usually an issue with the sensor. So I'm just going to fast forward here a little bit so that you guys can see what actually I'm at the end of the video. So here's the O2 sensor cycling nicely. You can see the yellow signal going up and down from about, what is that, 100 millivolts up to about 800. The warmer the O2 sensor gets, the cleaner the signal. The higher the RPM, the more pronounced the signal will be, or more closely staggered together. The coolant temperatures you can see here, I am expecting it to stay low, but you can see there are some variations where it will all of a sudden jump a bit. Here you can see some more. O2 sensor is still looking good at this point. I'm still driving the vehicle. Here is quite a bit of activity with the temperature sensor. Initially I thought that maybe it is the temperature sensor that's causing his problem, and that eventually would cut out completely. So I was waiting for the green signal to go way off the charts, which it never did. Here you can see some lower RPM idling because the O2 is staggered more or spaced more. Again, higher RPM, the O2 signal will be spaced together or closer more. Here's a big jump in temperature as well, or in terms of the signal. Here as well again. So I'm still thinking that maybe it isn't a temperature sensor issue, because at this point the O2 sensor is not acting up. Here you can see the deceleration fuel shutoff. So obviously it had, was driving the vehicle at higher RPM, and then was decelerating in gear, fuel shutoff, which is normal. The engine cuts fuel, and then back to driving. You can see the signal working normally, but eventually I get to a point, come on, there it is, where the signal starts to look weird, and then all of a sudden it gets narrower, and then it even comes down and sticks in the lean area. So at this point right now the vehicle is running quite rough, lack of power, some smoke out the tailpipe. So what I then did, I pulled over, I disconnected the O2 sensor so you can see the signal that I was back probing. I was back probing on the harness side of the O2 connector. So I disconnected the O2 sensor, but my Vantage is still connected to the engine computer side of the harness. So you can see here the signal here is 0.45 to 0.5 volts, which is a normal O2 reference voltage. The temperature sensor is behaving normal right here again. And so at this point I got back in the car and I started driving, and power was back immediately, drove perfectly fine in so-called open loop with the O2 sensor out of the equation. So at this point I already knew that the problem was due to the O2 sensor. Had there been an underlying issue in terms of, let's say, the fuel pump not pumping enough fuel, that's why it went lean, or the fuel pressure regulator, for instance, sticking, causing an overly rich mixture, anything like that, it would have caused the vehicle to continue to run rough, or have the lack of power. And since the vehicle was behaving normally at this point, I knew that it was an O2 sensor. For whatever reason, once the O2 sensor got to a certain level of temperature, it just started to act up. So here I'm continuing to drive, no problems at all. There's still some fluctuations in the temperature sensor signal. I did replace the temperature sensor as well at the same time. I found no faults with the wiring, in terms of loose connection or anything like that. So long story short, an O2 sensor and a temperature sensor solved the problem on this vehicle. I'm just going to zoom out. Sometimes it's easier to see things when you look at the overall zoomed out image. Here you can see lots of O2 activity. You can see here the green traces jumping up a bit and then back down. Here you can see the O2 sensor starting to, the signal getting narrower, and then also coming down to the lean point and staying lean. This is where I disconnected it, and this is the normal reference sensor voltage, or reference voltage for that O2 sensor. All these little spikes I wouldn't worry about. That's just voltage induced, or stray voltages that are picked up from around the ignition coil, or where the O2 sensor wiring harness is, running along in the engine bay. So that's it. Hopefully I didn't make this thing too confusing or boring, but simple things to do when you experience rough running, hesitation, lack of power is just monitor your O2 sensor and monitor your temperature, engine coolant temperature signal, see what they do, because on these older vehicles, those are the main inputs, and they can cause drastic performance issues when one or the other fails.